The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Mercantile, and Meredith Kane stepped down into the bitter January wind of Tonopah Junction, Nevada, clutching her threadbare shawl around her shoulders as snow swirled through the main street like angry spirits, determined to drive her back where she came from. It was 1883, and she had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis with everything she owned bundled into 2 carpet bags and a leather satchel that had belonged to her father before consumption took him last autumn. Her mother had followed him into the ground just before Christmas, leaving Meredith with nothing but debts, and a letter from a distant aunt in Tonopah Junction who had promised her work at the town's boarding house. The letter was dated 6 months prior, but Meredith had no other options, no other place in this world that might take her in. She stood on the wooden boardwalk as the stagecoach pulled away, watching the few townspeople on the street turn to look at her with expressions that started curious and quickly turned cold. A woman in a fine wool coat whispered something to her companion, and they both hurried past without acknowledgement. A man in a shopkeeper's apron stepped out from his store, looked her up and down with narrowed eyes, then went back inside and flipped his sign to close though it was barely past noon. Meredith pulled her aunt's letter from her pocket, checking the address again. The boarding house was supposed to be on Mineral Street, just past the church. She picked up her bags and started walking, her boots crunching through the fresh snow that was already accumulating on the boardwalk. The wind cut through her clothing like knives, and she realized with growing dread that her St. Louis coat was nowhere near warm enough for a Nevada winter at this elevation. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with peeling yellow paint and a crooked sign that read, "Kane's Rest." At least the name was right. Meredith climbed the front steps and knocked on the door. No answer came. She knocked again, harder this time, and finally tried the handle. Locked. A man clearing snow from the walkway next door called out to her. "Nobody there, miss. Mrs. Kane died 2 months back." "Diphtheria." Meredith felt her stomach drop. "Are you certain? I am her niece. She wrote to me about employment here." The man leaned on his shovel, his weathered face showing something between pity and suspicion. "Dead and buried. Town took over the property for unpaid taxes." "You got anywhere else to go?" "No," Meredith said quietly. "I do not." He nodded slowly, then went back to shoveling without another word. Meredith stood on the porch for a long moment, trying to think. She had $12 to her name, not enough for passage back to St. Louis, even if she had anything to return to. She needed shelter, and she needed it before nightfall when the temperature would plummet even further. She walked back toward the main street, stopping at each establishment to inquire about work or lodging. The Mercantile owner took one look at her worn clothing and told her they had no positions available. The restaurant owner said the same before she even finished asking. The hotel clerk quoted her a price of $2 per night, which would leave her destitute within a week. At the church, she found the door unlocked and slipped inside, grateful for even the marginal warmth of the small building. She sat in a back pew and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to feel the full weight of her situation, then stood and walked to the front where she could see a small office door standing open. "Excuse me," she called out. "Is anyone here?" A young man in minister's clothing emerged, his face pleasant until he saw her. Then his expression shifted to something guarded. "Can I help you? I am Meredith Kane. I came here to stay with my aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Kane, but I have just learned of her passing. I find myself without resources or shelter. I was hoping the church might know of any families seeking household help or any available lodging I might afford." The minister studied her for a long moment. "Kane, Eleanor's niece from back east." "Yes, from St. Louis." His jaw tightened. "I see. I'm afraid I cannot help you, Miss Kane, Perhaps you should return to where you came from. I beg your pardon. I am simply asking for information about work. We have no work for you here, he said, his voice hardening. Your aunt left this town with quite a scandal before she passed. Gambling debts, improper conduct, association with unsavory characters. The Kane name carries no goodwill in Tonopah Junction. Now, I must ask you to leave. Meredith felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold that permeated the building. I had no knowledge of my aunt's circumstances. I have done nothing wrong. Surely Christian charity would dictate that I be judged on my own character and not on rumors about a woman I barely knew. Good day, Miss Kane. The minister turned and walked back into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Meredith left the church with her hands shaking from more than just cold. The sky was growing darker, and the snow was falling harder now. She tried 2 more businesses with the same result. Word had spread quickly through the small town. Eleanor Kane's niece was here, and she was as unwelcome as her aunt had been. By late afternoon, Meredith was walking the outskirts of town, desperately searching for anywhere that might offer shelter from the coming night. She found herself on a narrow road that led away from the main settlement, where scattered houses and small ranches dotted the landscape. Her hands were numb inside her thin gloves, and she could no longer feel her toes in her damp boots. She nearly walked past the small ranch house set back from the road, its log construction solid and well-maintained despite its modest size. A barn stood behind it, and she could see a corral with several horses stamping and snorting in the cold. Smoke rose from the chimney, speaking of warmth and life inside. Meredith stood at the gate in the fence, weighing her pride against her survival. Pride had no value if she froze to death on the side of the road. She pushed open the gate and walked up the path to the front door, raised her frozen hand, and knocked. The door opened to reveal a tall man in his mid-20s with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore simple ranch clothing, his sleeves rolled up despite the cold, and he looked at her with surprise rather than the instant hostility she had encountered everywhere else in town. "Help you?" he asked. "I am sorry to disturb you," Meredith said, hating the way her voice trembled from cold and exhaustion. "My name is Meredith Kane. I arrived in Tonopah Junction today expecting to stay with my aunt, but she has passed away. The town has made it clear I am not welcome, and I have nowhere to go. I can work. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. I am asking if you might have any work available or if you know of anyone who might. I can sleep in a barn if necessary. I just need shelter from this storm." The man looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced past her at the darkening sky and the snow that was now falling in thick curtains. "You are Eleanor Kane's niece." "I am, though I barely knew her. We corresponded by letter only. Whatever she did, I had no part in it." He nodded slowly. "You have been walking in this cold for hours, haven't you? Your lips are turning blue." I did not have many options. "Come inside," he said, stepping back from the door. "We can discuss work after you warm up. You are no good to anyone if you lose your fingers to frostbite." Meredith hesitated for just a moment, aware that entering a strange man's home could bring its own dangers, but the alternative was certain death in the storm. She stepped across the threshold, and he closed the door behind her, shutting out the howling wind. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace radiating blessed heat into the main room. A kitchen area occupied one corner. A table with 4 chairs sat near the fireplace, and 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was neat and well-ordered, the home of someone who took care with his surroundings. "Sit by the fire," the man said. I will get you something hot to drink." Meredith set down her bags and moved to one of the chairs near the fireplace, holding her hands out toward the flames. The warmth hurt as sensation began returning to her frozen fingers, but it was the most welcome pain she had ever felt. The man returned with a cup of coffee, strong and hot, and she wrapped her hands around it gratefully. He sat down in the chair across from her, studying her with those storm-colored eyes. "I am Yates Donovan," he said. "I run this ranch alone, mostly cattle and horses. It is not much, but it supports me well enough. Thank you for letting me in, Mr. Donovan. I know you have no reason to trust me." "Yates," he corrected. "And you are right that I have no reason to trust you, but I also have no reason to let you freeze to death because the town decided your aunt's sins are yours to carry. That does not sit right with me. The minister said she had gambling debts and kept unsavory company." Yates made a sound that might have been amusement. "Meredith Kane was a difficult woman, that is true, but most of what turned the town against her was that she refused to bend to their expectations. She ran her boarding house her way, took in people others would not serve. Miners down on their luck, drifters passing through, even a few Chinese railroad workers when everyone else in town turned them away. Some of those men did gamble, and some did drink too much, but Meredith believed everyone deserved a place to rest their head. "That does not sound like scandal," Meredith said. "That sounds like compassion. Try telling that to the ladies of the Tonopah Junction Morality Society." They wanted Meredith to refuse service to anyone they deemed unsuitable. When she would not, they made her life miserable, started rumors, pressured her suppliers, convinced people not to do business with her. That is why she had unpaid taxes. They strangled her income until she could not keep up. Meredith felt a surge of anger at the injustice, followed by a deeper fear. "Then they will do the same to me." "Probably," Yates agreed, his honesty brutal but not unkind. "The town has a long memory and little forgiveness. Once they have decided you are unwelcome, there is not much changing their minds. Then what am I to do? I have no money for passage elsewhere, and even if I did, I have nowhere to go." Yates was quiet for a moment, watching the fire. "How are you with horses?" "I beg your pardon, horses." "Can you handle them?" "I'm not asking if you can ride like a cavalry soldier. I mean, can you be around them without panicking, feed them, brush them down, that sort of thing?" "I grew up around horses before my family fell on hard times. My father kept a stable in St. Louis. I helped care for them from the time I was young." "Can you cook?" "Yes, well enough to keep someone fed and healthy. Mend clothing, keep a house clean." "Yes to both." Yates leaned back in his chair, still studying her. "I do not need a ranch hand for the heavy work. I can manage the cattle and the hard labor myself. But I do need help with the daily tasks that keep a household running. Cooking, cleaning, maintaining the home and the stable, mending tack and clothing. I spend too much time on those tasks and not enough time on the work that actually earns money. If you can handle those duties, I can offer you room and board plus $10 a month in wages. You would have the spare bedroom. I would expect your conduct to be proper at all times, and I would maintain mine the same way. This would be purely an employment arrangement." Meredith looked at him, trying to read his intentions. He met her gaze steadily, no hint of anything improper in his expression, just straightforward practicality. "Why would you take such a risk?" she asked. "If the town has decided I am unwelcome, they will not look kindly on you for taking me in." "The town and I already have an understanding," Yates said. "I do my business, they do theirs, and we mostly stay out of each other's way. I am not part of their social circles by choice. They will talk, but they already talk about me for keeping to myself. A little more gossip will not change my life much." The question is whether you can handle it. Living out here means isolation. You will not be welcomed into town society such as it is. You will not make friends among the townswomen. You will spend most of your time on this ranch with only me and the animals for company. Mr. Donovan, Yates, I have no other options. If I refuse your offer, I will be sleeping in a snowbank tonight. I am deeply grateful for your kindness and I accept your terms, he nodded. All right then. Finish your coffee and warm up properly. I will show you the bedroom and where everything is kept. We can start fresh tomorrow with your duties. Tonight you just rest. True to his word, Yates showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom with a real bed, clean linens, and even a quilt that looked handmade. There was a chest of drawers for her belongings and a small table with a wash basin. A window looked out over the ranch, though it was full dark now and she could see nothing but snow swirling past the glass. I know it is not much, Yates said from the doorway. It is everything, Meredith replied honestly. It is warm and dry and safe, and that is more than I had any right to hope for today. He nodded, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. The necessary is out back behind the house. There is a path, follow it straight. I will heat some water so you can wash up before dinner. Do you need anything else right now? No, this is perfect, thank you. After he left, Meredith sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. She had come so close to disaster, closer than she wanted to admit even to herself. The storm outside was a full blizzard now, the wind shrieking around the house. If Yates Donovan had turned her away, she would likely not have survived the night. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress and coat on pegs along the wall, placing her undergarments and other necessities in the chest of drawers. Everything she owned fit easily with room to spare. It was a stark reminder of how far her life had fallen, but at least she still had a life. That was more than she might have said just an hour ago. True to his word, Yates brought her a basin of warm water and left it outside her door with a knock to let her know it was there. She washed away the grime of travel and changed into her other dress, which was only marginally better than the one she had been wearing. Both were old and worn, mended in several places, but they were clean and they were all she had. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Yates working at the stove, stirring something in a large pot that smelled of beef and vegetables. The table was already set with 2 plates, 2 cups, and simple utensils. I thought you said you needed someone who could cook, Meredith said. I did not say I could not cook, Yates replied without turning from the stove. I said I spent too much time on household tasks. I can make basic meals that keep me alive, but that is about the extent of it. If you can do better than boiled meat and vegetables, I will be grateful. I can do better, she assured him. They ate dinner in relative silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Meredith was too hungry and too exhausted for much conversation, and Yates seemed like a man who did not fill silence just for the sake of noise. The food was indeed basic but filling, and she was grateful for every bite. After dinner, she insisted on cleaning the dishes despite Yates's protest that she should rest her first evening. She needed to feel useful, needed to start earning her keep. He eventually relented and let her work while he sat at the table going over some ledgers, making notes in careful handwriting. When the kitchen was clean, Meredith found herself at a loss. It was not yet 8 o'clock, but the day's trials had exhausted her completely. Yates must have noticed her fatigue because he closed his ledger and stood. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow we'll come early on a ranch. I am usually up before dawn to tend the animals. What time would you like breakfast? Whenever you are ready to make it. I usually just grab something cold before heading out. A hot breakfast would be a luxury, but do not feel you need to match my schedule immediately. take a few days to adjust." "I will be fine," Meredith said. "I am used to early mornings." She bid him good night and retreated to her bedroom, closing the door and leaning against it for a moment. The bed called to her, and she changed into her nightgown and slipped under the covers. The sheets were cold at first but warmed quickly, and the quilt was heavy and comforting. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional creak of the house settling, Meredith thought about the strange turn her life had taken. She had expected to arrive at her aunt's boarding house, to work there serving meals and cleaning rooms for guests. Instead, she was living on an isolated ranch with a stranger who had shown her more kindness in 2 hours than the entire town had in a day. Yates Donovan was an enigma. He was clearly educated, his speech proper and his home well maintained. Yet he chose to live alone on this ranch, isolated from the town and its society. He had taken her in when he had no reason to trust her and every reason to turn her away. Was he simply a good man, or was there something else driving his actions? She supposed she would find out in time. For now, she had shelter and employment, and that was enough. Tomorrow she would begin earning her place here, proving to Yates that he had not made a mistake in taking her in. The wind howled, the fire crackled in the other room, and Meredith Kane fell asleep in her first real bed in weeks. Warm and safe despite the frozen town that had rejected her, morning came cold and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Meredith woke to pale dawn light filtering through her window and the sound of boots moving around in the main room. She dressed quickly in the freezing air of the bedroom and emerged to find Yates already bundled in his coat, heading for the door. "Good morning," she said, startling him slightly. "Morning," he replied. "I did not expect you to be up yet. I was just heading out to the barn." "I will start breakfast. Will you want it when you return?" "That would be good. An hour should be enough time for the morning feeding and check." He left, and Meredith set to work exploring the kitchen. She found eggs, bacon, flour, salt, and other basics. The pantry was reasonably well stocked for a bachelor household, though she could already see items she would need to request for proper cooking. For this morning, she would make do with what was available. By the time Yates returned, stamping snow off his boots just outside the door, she had breakfast ready. Scrambled eggs cooked with butter and herbs she had found dried in the pantry, bacon fried crispy, and biscuits that were not her best work but certainly better than none at all. She had even managed coffee, strong and hot. Yates stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at the table she had set. "I did not expect all this." "It is just breakfast," Meredith said, suddenly worried she had overstepped. "I did not know what you preferred, so I made a bit of everything." "I prefer all of this," he said, hanging his coat by the door and moving to the table. "I usually have cold biscuits and jerky if I eat anything at all. This is amazing." They sat and ate, and Meredith felt a small swell of pride at the way Yates consumed the food with obvious appreciation. It was a simple thing, cooking a meal, but it felt good to provide something of value after being rejected by everyone else in this place. "What would you like me to focus on today?" she asked as they finished eating. "Whatever you think needs doing," Yates said. "I have been living like a bachelor for a long time, which means my standards for housekeeping have fallen lower than they should be. Just do whatever seems most important to you. This afternoon, if the weather holds, I need to ride out and check on the cattle in the winter pasture. That will take most of the day. Will you need me to prepare food for you to take? That would be helpful, yes." After breakfast, Yates headed back out to work on projects in the barn, and Meredith began a thorough assessment of the house. It was not as bad as she had feared, but definitely showed signs of neglect in the smaller details. The floors needed sweeping and washing, the windows could use cleaning, and every piece of fabric in the house from curtains to bedding needed laundering when the weather permitted. She started with the main room, sweeping accumulated dirt and dust, washing the floors, cleaning the windows until they sparkled. She found Yates's bedroom door open and hesitated before entering. It felt intimate somehow, but it was part of her duties. She swept and dusted there as well, noting that his personal space was as neat as the rest of the house, but could still benefit from a thorough cleaning. At midday, she prepared a simple lunch of sandwiches and coffee, calling Yates in from the barn. They ate quickly, and then she packed him food for his ride while he saddled his horse. She watched from the window as he rode out, sitting his horse with easy competence, and then she returned to her work. The afternoon passed quickly with tasks that needed doing. She examined all of Yates's clothing and found numerous items that needed mending, buttons replaced, seams repaired. She found his sewing kit and settled by the window where the light was best, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. It was nearly dark when she heard his horse in the yard. She had dinner cooking, a beef stew that had been simmering all afternoon, making the house smell of home and comfort. Yates came in looking cold and tired, but he smiled when he saw the set table and smelled the cooking food. "Everything all right with the cattle?" Meredith asked as he removed his coat, cold but surviving. "They have good shelter in the draw where I keep them through winter. Should be fine unless we get another bad storm." He paused, looking around the main room. "Did you clean the windows?" "Yes, among other things. I can actually see outside clearly now. I had forgotten what that was like." There was amusement in his voice, a dry humor that she was beginning to recognize as his way. They ate dinner together, talking a bit more than they had the previous evening. Yates told her about the ranch, how he had bought it 4 years ago with money he had saved working as a ranch hand for larger operations. He was building his herd slowly but steadily, choosing quality over quantity, and he had a good reputation among the ranchers in the area, even if the townspeople kept their distance. "Why do they keep their distance?" Meredith asked. "You seem perfectly respectable." Yates was quiet for a moment, and she worried she had overstepped. But then he answered, his voice careful. "I came here with questions about my past that people did not like. I was looking for information about my father, who died when I was young. The story I had always been told was that he was a ranch hand who died in an accident, but I found letters suggesting something different, that he had been involved in something that made powerful people angry. Did you find answers?" "Some. Enough to know that the story I was told was a lie, but not enough to know the full truth. The people who might have answers do not want to talk to me. And the town, well, they do not like troublemakers or people who dig up old scandals. So they tolerate me because I am a good neighbor and I keep to myself, but they do not embrace me." "I am sorry," Meredith said. "That must be difficult. It is what it is. I have land, I have work I enjoy, I have my freedom. That is more than many people have." She could not argue with that. It was certainly more than she had just yesterday. The days fell into a rhythm over the following week. Meredith woke early, made breakfast, cleaned and maintained the house while Yates worked with the animals and saw to the heavier ranch tasks. She cooked 3 meals a day, did laundry when the weather permitted, mended everything that needed mending, and slowly brought the house up to standards her mother would have approved of. Yates was an easy person to work for, in that he asked for little and appreciated much. He did not criticize or make demands, but she could see his genuine gratitude in small ways. The way he savored meals, the pleased surprise when he found all his shirts mended and clean, the quiet thank you when he came home to a warm house and hot coffee. but they still maintained a careful distance. Their conversations at meals were pleasant but rarely personal beyond what they had shared that first full day. Meredith slept in her room with the door closed, and Yates never gave her any reason to feel unsafe or uncomfortable. Their arrangement was exactly what he had promised: proper employment with mutual respect. It was lonely sometimes, though. Meredith had no one to talk to except Yates, and their conversations, while growing more comfortable, were still somewhat stilted by their awareness of the unusual situation. She was a woman living alone with a man, unchaperoned, in circumstances that would scandalize proper society. The fact that nothing improper was happening did not change how it would be perceived. On the 8th day of her residence at the ranch, Yates announced over breakfast that he needed to go into town for supplies. "I can make you a list of what is needed for the kitchen," Meredith offered. "You should come with me," Yates said. "You can pick out what you need better than I can, and you might want some personal items. I can give you an advance on your wages." Meredith felt her stomach tighten. "I am not certain I would be welcome in town." "Probably not," Yates agreed, "but you cannot hide on this ranch forever. You live in Tonopah Junction now, whether they like it or not. They will have to get used to seeing you, and the sooner that starts, the better." He was right, though she dreaded the prospect. She had been so comfortable here, warm and safe and useful, but this could not last forever in isolation. She would need to be able to move through town eventually, to purchase her own items, to handle her own business. "All right," she said. "I will come." They rode into town in Yates's wagon, the morning cold but clear. The journey took about 40 minutes, following the road that wound through the hills into the heart of Tonopah Junction. As they approached, Meredith felt her anxiety growing. How would people react to seeing her with Yates? Would they turn their rejection to him as well? Yates seemed unconcerned, guiding the wagon down the main street with easy confidence. They stopped first at the Mercantile, and Meredith steeled herself as they entered. The shopkeeper, the same man who had turned her away that first day, looked up with a greeting that died on his lips when he saw her. His expression hardened. "Donovan." "Morning, Mr. Pierce," Yates said pleasantly. "I need supplies. Miss Kane has a list." Mr. Pierce looked between them, his jaw working. "So the rumors are true. You took in Alina Kane's niece." "I hired her to help run my household. Miss Kane, give Mr. Pierce your list." Meredith stepped forward and handed over the paper she had prepared. The shopkeeper took it without looking at her, his disapproval radiating from him like heat from a stove. He began gathering items in tense silence while Yates examined some tools on a far wall. Two women entered the store, saw Meredith, and immediately began whispering to each other. One of them, a severe-looking woman in an expensive dress, approached the counter where Meredith stood. "Mr. Pierce, I am shocked that you would serve someone like her," the woman said loudly. "After what her aunt did to this town, after the shame she brought on us all, I would think you would show more loyalty to decent people." "I am serving Mr. Donovan, Mrs. Whitmore," the shopkeeper said uncomfortably. "I cannot refuse his business." "Why not?" "You refused hers when she first arrived. Or has Yates Donovan made her respectable by taking her into his home as his woman?" Meredith felt blood rush to her face, but before she could respond, Yates was there, his voice cutting through the store like a blade. "I would advise you to be very careful with your next words, Mrs. Whitmore. Miss Kane is my employee, and my household is run with absolute propriety. Any suggestion otherwise is slander, and I will respond to it as such. Are we clear?" Mrs. Whitmore drew herself up, offended. "You cannot speak to me that way." "I just did. Now you can apologize to Miss Kane for your insinuation, or you can leave. Mr. Pierce is conducting my business at the moment, and you are interfering with it." The shopkeeper looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The other customers in the store had stopped to stare, and Meredith could see people gathering outside the windows, drawn by the raised voices. Mrs. Whitmore's face went red. "You are as disreputable as your father was, Yates Donovan, and she is as scandalous as her aunt. You deserve each other." She turned and swept from the store, her companion scurrying after her. The silence that followed was oppressive. Mr. Pierce finished gathering supplies with shaking hands, quoted a price, and took Yates's money without meeting anyone's eyes. Yates loaded the supplies into the wagon with Meredith's help, and they drove to the next stop in heavy silence. When they were away from the immediate press of the town, Meredith finally spoke. "I am sorry. I did not want to bring trouble to you." "You did not bring it," Yates said, his voice still tight with anger. "Mrs. Whitmore and her ilk brought it themselves by refusing to see anything but what they want to see. Her husband is on the town council and thinks that makes them royalty. She has made life miserable for anyone who does not bow to her standards. She called you disreputable. She said something about your father. My father's name was Yates Donovan Sr. He worked for the Whitmore family ranch 25 years ago. According to them, he was a thief who stole from them and ran off with their money. According to my mother, he found evidence that they were cheating the government on land grants, and they killed him to keep him quiet. I have never been able to prove it either way, but the Whitmores have long memories. Me buying land here and asking questions about the past has not made me popular with them." "I see," Meredith said quietly. "We are both marked by our family's histories. Seems that way." They completed their business in town with similar hostile receptions at each stop. Not everyone was as openly antagonistic as Mrs. Whitmore, but the cold shoulders and disapproving looks were universal. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Meredith felt exhausted from the weight of judgment that had been heaped upon her. "Thank you for defending me," she said as they neared home. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Yates replied. "What they were implying was wrong, and I will not let lies stand unchallenged. You have done nothing to deserve their treatment. Neither did your aunt, really, though they will never admit that. Mr. Pierce said she brought shame on the town. She refused to discriminate against people based on their race or station. That was her crime. That and not caring what the morality society thought of her. In a town like this, that is enough to make you a pariah." The wagon rattled into the yard, and they unloaded supplies in silence. Meredith found herself thinking about what Yates had said about his father, about the town's long memory, about how both of them were living under the shadows of accusations and suspicions they had not earned. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Meredith found her thoughts returning again and again to the confrontation in the mercantile. Yates had defended her without hesitation, putting himself directly in conflict with one of the most powerful families in the region. He had called her slander what it was and demanded she apologize, even though he must have known it would only make his own position in town worse. She looked through the doorway to where he sat at the table, working on his ledgers as he did most evenings. He was a good man, she realized. Not just kind in his actions, but truly good in his bones. He had taken her in when no one else would. He treated her with respect and dignity, and he stood up for her honor without being asked. The realization sent a small flutter through her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. She could not afford to develop feelings for Yates Donovan. Their arrangement was employment, nothing more, and it would stay that way. She depended on him for her survival. Any romantic notions would only complicate things and likely end with her back on the street. But as the days continued to pass, Meredith found it increasingly difficult to maintain her emotional distance. Yates was easy to be around. his presence steady and calm. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, making her laugh when she least expected it. He was unfailingly considerate, always making sure she had what she needed, never making demands that were unreasonable. And he was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all lean strength and weathered confidence. She found herself watching him sometimes as he worked, the way he moved with easy competence, the rare smile that transformed his face when something pleased him. She was falling for him, slowly but surely, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Winter deepened, and the ranch became a world unto itself. Heavy snows isolated them for days at a time, making travel to town impossible. Meredith found that she did not mind. Here on the ranch, she did not have to face the judgment and hostility of Tonopah Junction. Here, it was just her and Yates and the comfortable rhythm of their days. They talked more as the weeks passed, the stilted formality of those first days gradually giving way to genuine conversation. Yates told her about growing up in California, about his mother who died when he was 20, about the years he spent working for other ranchers and saving every penny to buy his own place. Meredith told him about St. Louis, about her father's business that failed when he got sick, about nursing both her parents through their final illnesses, about the loneliness of being the last of her family. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Yates looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said. "Of course. Why did you never marry? A woman like you, educated and capable, surely you had opportunities." Meredith felt heat rise in her cheeks. "There was someone once. A young man my father approved of. We had an understanding, though we were not formally engaged. But when my father's business failed, when it became clear that I would have no dowry and might even bring debts into a marriage, he made it known that the understanding was no longer in place. I spent the next 3 years caring for my parents, and after they died, I had nothing to offer anyone. Men do not marry penniless women, not when they have other options." "Some men are fools, then," Yates said quietly. She met his eyes and found something there that made her heart race, but before she could respond, he looked away, standing abruptly. "I should turn in. Morning comes early." "Yes, of course. Good night." He disappeared into his room, and Meredith sat staring at the fire, wondering if she had imagined the intensity in his gaze, the possibility that had hung in the air between them. March brought the first hints of spring, though winter was far from over. The days grew minutely longer, and there were afternoons when the sun felt almost warm. Yates began preparing for spring work, checking equipment, planning which pastures would be used for what purposes. Meredith had settled fully into the rhythm of ranch life. She took pride in the household she maintained, in the meals she prepared, in the comfort she provided. She had money in her pocket now. Wages Yates paid her faithfully every month, though she had nowhere to spend it and nothing she really needed. She was saving it, though for what she could not say. On a day in mid-March, Yates came in for lunch looking troubled. Meredith served him the soup she had made and waited, sensing he had something on his mind. "I need to go to the Whitmore Ranch tomorrow," he said finally. "Why?" "There is a breeding stallion there that I want access to for 2 of my mares. William Whitmore, despite his wife's hostility, is a reasonable businessman. We have had dealings before. But it means I will be gone most of the day, possibly overnight if the weather turns." "I will be fine here alone," Meredith assured him, though the thought of being without him for that long brought an unexpected anxiety. "I know you will. You are more than capable. I just wanted you to know." He paused, then added, "If something were to happen, if someone came around causing trouble, there is a rifle behind the door in my room. Do you know how to use one? My father taught me when I was young. I am not an expert, but I can shoot if I need to. I do not expect any trouble, but I would rather you be prepared." The next morning, Yates left before dawn, and Meredith found herself alone in the house for the first time since she arrived. It felt strange without his presence, too quiet, too empty. She threw herself into her work, baking bread, doing mending, organizing the pantry. But the day dragged, and she found herself watching the road more often than she should, waiting for his return. Evening came with no sign of him, and Meredith prepared for the possibility that he would stay overnight as he had mentioned. She made herself dinner, checked on the horses in the barn as she had watched Yates do countless times, and settled in for the evening. She was reading by the fire when she heard horses in the yard, multiple horses. Relief flooded through her, but it died quickly when she realized the sounds were wrong. Too many horses and unfamiliar voices. A heavy knock sounded on the door. Meredith stood, her heart pounding. "Who is there?" "Open up, Miss Kane. We would like a word." She did not recognize the voice. "Mr. Donovan is not here at present. You will have to return tomorrow." "We are not here for Donovan. We are here for you. Open the door." Fear prickled down her spine. She moved to Yates's room and retrieved the rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded as her father had taught her. Then she returned to the door, standing to the side where she would not be an immediate target if it was forced open. "I am not opening this door. State your business and leave." "Your business is done in this town, Miss Kane. We know you are alone tonight. We have come to escort you to the stage depot. There is a coach leaving in the morning and you will be on it. Tonopah Junction has tolerated your presence long enough. I am employed here legally. I have done nothing wrong. I am not leaving. You are a scandal and a shame. Your presence brings disrepute to this town and to Yates Donovan. For his sake as much as ours, you need to go." "Go away," Meredith said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. "I am armed, and I will defend myself if you try to force entry into this house." There was silence, then low conversation she could not make out. Finally, the same voice called out, "You cannot stay here forever. Donovan cannot protect you from what this town thinks. You will leave one way or another. Consider this your warning." She heard boots on the porch, then horses moving away. Meredith stood frozen, the rifle clutched in her hands, for long minutes after the sounds faded. Then she moved to the window and looked out, seeing nothing in the darkness. They had gone, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. She did not sleep that night, sitting by the fire with the rifle across her lap, jumping at every sound the house made as it settled, every gust of wind against the walls. Her mind raced with fear and anger. How dare they come here, threaten her, demand she leave when she had done nothing wrong? What gave them the right to dictate her life, to drive her away from the first real home she had known in years? Dawn was breaking when she heard a single horse approaching. She moved to the window and felt overwhelming relief when she recognized Yates's form on his horse. She set the rifle aside and opened the door as he dismounted. "You are back early," she said, and he must have heard something in her voice because he looked at her sharply. "What happened?" She told him everything, watching his expression grow darker with each word. By the time she finished, his jaw was tight and his eyes were hard. "Did you recognize any voices?" "No, but one of them said they were acting for the town's sake and for yours." "For my sake," Yates repeated, anger clear in every syllable. "Because apparently I am incapable of making my own decisions about my household. Did they threaten you physically?" "Not directly, but the implication was clear. They said I would leave one way or another." Yates paced the length of the room, his hands clenched into fists. "This has gone too far. You were right to refuse them. This is my home, you are my employee, and no one has any right to force you out." "But they will try again," Meredith said quietly. "And next time you might not arrive in time to stop them. Maybe I should leave, go somewhere else, somewhere I can start fresh without all these complications. Is that what you want?" She looked at him, at the anger and concern warring in his expression, and knew with sudden clarity that leaving was the last thing she wanted. Somewhere over these past months, this ranch had become home. Yates had become more than an employer. The thought of leaving, of never seeing him again, was painful in a way that surprised her with its intensity. "No," she said honestly. "I do not want to leave, but I do not want to cause you trouble either. You are not the one causing trouble, they are." He stopped pacing and turned to face her fully. "Meredith, I need to be honest with you about something. This situation, your presence here, it has become more complicated than I intended." "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had rarely seen from him. "When I first offered you employment, it was a business arrangement. You needed help, I needed help, it made practical sense. But over these months, things have changed. For me, at least. I find myself thinking about you constantly. I look forward to coming home because you are here. I defend you not just because it is right, but because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me furious in a way that goes beyond rational thought." Meredith's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Yates, I know this is improper. I know I am your employer, and I am putting you in an impossible position by saying this. If you want me to take you to another town, help you find other employment where you will not have to deal with all this mess, I will do it. I will give you money, references, whatever you need. But if there is any chance that you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I am asking you to stay. Not as my employee, but as my wife." The world seemed to stop. Meredith stared at him, trying to process the words she had not dared to hope to hear. "Your wife? I know it is sudden. I know you have only known me a few months, but those months have been the best of my life. You have brought warmth and comfort and joy to this house and to my days. You are strong and capable and kind, and I have fallen in love with you. If you could see your way to accepting me, I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never regretted it." Meredith felt tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I was being foolish, developing feelings for you. I told myself it was just gratitude, that I was confusing kindness with something more. But it is not gratitude. It is love. I have fallen in love with you too, Yates. I want nothing more than to stay here, to build a life with you, to be your wife." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "You mean it. I mean it." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, feeling the strength and warmth of him surrounding her. He was shaking slightly, and she realized he had been as terrified of her answer as she had been of her feelings. "We should do it soon," Yates said, pulling back just enough to see her face. "A proper wedding with a minister and witnesses. That will end any talk about impropriety. Once you are my wife, no one can drive you away without going through me first. Mrs. Whitmore will be furious. Mrs. Whitmore can choke on her indignation for all I care. I will not let her or anyone else dictate my life. Will you marry me, Meredith Kane? Will you be my wife and my partner and the other half of my life?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, a gentle kiss that held promise and commitment and a future full of possibilities. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was fully up, streaming through the windows Meredith had cleaned weeks ago, illuminating the home they would now share as husband and wife. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Tonopah Junction, the same church whose minister had turned Meredith away on her first day in town. Yates had been firm about this. They would marry publicly, properly, giving the town no room to question the legitimacy of their union. They would marry in the church because Meredith deserved a real wedding, not a hurried ceremony designed to appease gossips. The minister had resisted at first, but Yates had been quietly insistent, and eventually the man agreed. It helped that Yates had brought documentation showing his ownership of the ranch, his bank accounts, his respectability as a landowner and businessman. The minister might not like it, but he could not refuse to marry two adults who met all the legal and moral requirements. The morning of the wedding, Meredith dressed in the one good dress she owned, a deep blue silk that had belonged to her mother. It was several years out of fashion but still beautiful, and she wore her mother's cameo at her throat. She looked at herself in the mirror of the hotel room where she had spent the previous night, maintaining the proprieties even though everyone knew where she had been living for months. Yates had arranged for Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who ran a small laundry on the edge of town, to be her attendant. Mrs. Chen was an outsider like Meredith, someone the town society looked down upon, and she had accepted the position with quiet grace when Yates asked. She helped Meredith with her hair now, pinning it up in an elegant style that made her look older and more sophisticated. "You make a beautiful bride," Mrs. Chen said in her accented English. "Mr. Donovan is a good man. You will be happy." "Thank you," Meredith said, meaning it deeply. "Thank you for being here. I know it may cause trouble for you." "There is always trouble for people like us," Mrs. Chen replied with a slight smile. "At least this trouble comes from something good. A wedding is a blessing. Trouble from a blessing is easier to bear." They walked to the church together, and Meredith was surprised to see a small crowd gathered outside. Most were just curious onlookers, drawn by the spectacle of Yates Donovan marrying Meredith Kane's niece. But she also saw some friendly faces. A few of the ranchers from the surrounding areas, men who did business with Yates. Some of the miners and laborers who worked on the edges of town society. Even a few women who looked at her with sympathy rather than condemnation. Inside the church, Yates waited at the altar in his best suit, his hair freshly cut, his expression serious until he saw her. Then his whole face transformed with a smile so genuine and full of love that Meredith felt her own smile answering it. She walked down the aisle alone, having no one to give her away, but she did not feel alone. She felt stronger with each step, more certain. She was choosing this life, this man, this future. No one was forcing her hand or limiting her options. This was her choice, freely made. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows in clear voices, promising to love and honor and cherish, to stand together through whatever life brought them. Yates slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, and she did the same for him. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. As they turned to walk back down the aisle, Meredith saw Mrs. Whitmore sitting in a back pew, her face set in disapproving lines. But she also saw the ranchers nodding approvingly, Mrs. Chen wiping tears from her eyes, and several others smiling at them with genuine happiness. The town might never fully accept her, but she had allies here now. She had her husband, and she had people who were willing to see past old prejudices. The wedding breakfast was held at the hotel, a small affair that Yates had arranged. The food was simple but good, and the conversation was pleasant. Several people came to offer their congratulations, and Meredith found herself feeling more welcomed than she had since arriving in Tonopah Junction. An older rancher named John Hartwell approached them as they finished eating. "Congratulations, Donovan. You have got yourself a fine woman." "I know it," Yates replied, his hand finding Meredith's under the table. "My wife wanted me to extend an invitation to you both for Sunday dinner next week," Hartwell continued. "We live about 5 miles northwest of your place. Would give the ladies a chance to get acquainted. "We would be honored," Meredith said, surprised and touched by the invitation. "Good, good. It is past time this town remembered its manners. Your aunt was a good woman, Miss Kane. Mrs. Donovan now, I should say. She helped my son when he fell on hard times, gave him a place to stay when others turned him away. I did not forget that, and I will not stand by while people punish you for her supposed sins." After he left, Yates squeezed Meredith's hand. "See, there are good people here. It just takes time for them to show themselves." They returned to the ranch in the late afternoon, and Yates lifted Meredith down from the wagon with exaggerated ceremony, making her laugh. "Welcome home, Mrs. Donovan." "It has been home for months already," she said, "but I confess it feels different now. Better." He carried her over the threshold despite her protests that it was not necessary, setting her down in the main room with a grin. "I have wanted to do that since the day you accepted my proposal." That night, they came together as husband and wife, and Meredith discovered new depths of feeling she had not known existed. Yates was gentle and patient, treating her with a reverence that made her feel cherished and desired. Afterwards, lying in his arms in what was now their shared bedroom, she felt a peace she had not known since before her parents fell ill. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "More than I ever thought possible," Meredith replied honestly. "6 months ago, I was standing in a snowstorm thinking I might die on the streets of this town. Now I am married to the man I love, in a home I care for, with a future stretching ahead of me full of hope. It is almost too much to believe." "Believe it," he said, pulling her closer. "This is just the beginning for us. We are going to build something good here, something that lasts. We are going to prove to this town that people like us, people they rejected and looked down upon, can create lives as fine as any of theirs. Better even, because ours will be built on real love and respect." "I believe you," Meredith whispered. "I believe in us." Spring came to the ranch in full force, bringing new life and new work. Meredith discovered she loved this season most of all, the way the land transformed from frozen browns and whites to vibrant greens and golds. She planted a vegetable garden near the house, working the soil with her own hands, finding satisfaction in the simple act of nurturing growth. Yates was busy with calving season, which meant long days and often interrupted nights. Meredith learned to help where she could, mostly by keeping the household running smoothly and making sure Yates ate and rested when he had the chance. She also spent time with the horses, growing more comfortable with them each day, eventually able to assist with their care in meaningful ways. True to his word, John Hartwell and his wife Sarah hosted them for Sunday dinner, and Meredith found in Sarah a genuine friend. Sarah was in her 50s, practical and kind, with no patience for the social games that dominated town society. She spoke plainly about the injustices Meredith and her aunt had faced, and she made it clear that she and John would stand as allies and friends. "We have been ranching in this area for 30 years, Sarah said as she showed Meredith her own garden. "We have seen a lot of people come and go, seen a lot of judgment passed where it was not deserved. The Whitmores and their ilk think they run this place, but they forget that real power comes from the land and the people who work it. You and Yates are workers. You will outlast the gossips." Other friendships followed. Slowly, carefully, Meredith began to build connections with people on the fringes of Tonopah Junction society. Mrs. Chen became a regular visitor, teaching Meredith some of her traditional recipes in exchange for lessons in English reading. A young couple who had recently started a small farm nearby, the Reeves family, began trading goods and labor with them. These relationships were precious to Meredith, proof that she could find community even in a place that had initially rejected her. The town itself, remained cool toward her. She accompanied Yates on supply runs and handled her business with quiet dignity, refusing to show hurt when people were rude or dismissive. Some merchants warmed to her over time, recognizing that she was a regular customer who paid promptly and caused no trouble. Others remained hostile, but Meredith learned to simply take her business elsewhere. Summer brought heat and growth and hard work. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. Yates focused on the cattle and horses while Meredith managed the household, the garden, and increasingly the financial records. She had a head for numbers, it turned out, better than Yates did, and she began taking over the bookkeeping duties. Together, they made a formidable team. It was in late July when Meredith first suspected she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be certain, observing the signs her body was showing her, before she told Yates. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of orange and gold when she finally spoke. "I have something to tell you," she said, feeling nervous despite knowing he would be happy. Yates turned to her, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is right, actually. Yates, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, processing the information. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it made her laugh. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am more grateful than I can possibly express." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" "I am perfectly fine," Meredith assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong, and we have months to prepare." "Months," Yates repeated. "I need to build a cradle, and we should add on to the house, make a proper nursery, and we need to find a good doctor, someone you trust." Meredith laughed at his sudden panic. "We have time for all of that. Right now, let us just enjoy this moment. We made a new life, you and I. That is a miracle worth celebrating." They sat together as the sun finished setting, talking about names and possibilities and the future that seemed brighter than ever. Meredith felt a deep contentment settle over her. She had found home, found love, and now she would bring new life into this world they were building together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Meredith continued her work with some adjustments, allowing Yates to take over the heavier tasks while she focused on lighter duties. Sarah Hartwell proved invaluable, visiting regularly to check on her and share wisdom from her own experiences with childbirth. The doctor in Tonopah Junction was competent if somewhat cold, but he examined her regularly and pronounced everything normal and healthy. As her body changed and grew, Meredith found herself reflecting on how different her life was from what she had imagined just a year ago. She had thought herself destined for lonely spinsterhood at best, destitution at worst. Instead, she was a wife, soon to be a mother, with a home and a husband who loved her completely. She also found herself thinking often about her own mother, wishing desperately that she could have lived to see this, to meet her grandchild. The grief was still sharp sometimes, but it was tempered by gratitude for the time they had together, and for the lessons her mother had taught her about strength and dignity. Winter returned, and Meredith found herself housebound more often as her pregnancy advanced. She spent the short, cold days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, organizing the nursery that Yates had built onto the house with his own hands. He had done beautiful work, creating a warm, safe space with a window that looked out over the hills and a sturdy cradle that rocked smoothly at the lightest touch. In February, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Meredith went into labor. Sarah Hartwell had come to stay with them for the last few weeks of the pregnancy, and she took charge with calm competence. Yates, usually so steady and controlled, was a nervous wreck, pacing and worrying until Sarah finally ordered him outside to chop wood, so he would have something useful to do with his anxiety. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Meredith doubted she had the strength to continue. But Sarah coached her through it, and the doctor arrived in time to help with the final stages. In the early hours of the morning, as February gave way to March and winter finally began loosening its grip on the land, Meredith brought her son into the world. They named him James Yates Donovan, James for Meredith's father and Yates for his own. He was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and howling with outrage at being thrust into the cold world. Yates held him with shaking hands, tears streaming openly down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "You are beautiful. Thank you for this gift." Meredith, exhausted but elated, smiled up at her husband and son. "Welcome home, James. Welcome to the life we have built for you." The first months of James's life were a blur of feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. Meredith navigated new motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her life, learning as she went, accepting help when it was offered and asking for it when she needed it. Yates was a devoted father, taking on as much of the baby care as he could between his ranch duties, walking the floor with James in the middle of the night, changing diapers without complaint, staring at his son with undisguised wonder. As spring arrived and James grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, alert baby, the ranch came alive with activity. Meredith managed to balance motherhood with her household duties, carrying James in a sling as she worked, nursing him in the garden while the vegetables grew around them, teaching him about the horses from his father's arms. The town's attitude toward them had shifted somewhat with James's birth. It was harder to maintain hostility toward a young family trying to make their way in the world. Some people remained cold, Mrs. Whitmore chief among them, but others warmed considerably. Meredith received gifts of baby clothes and toys, invitations to bring James visiting, acknowledgement that she was now part of the community whether the old guard liked it or not. On James's first birthday, they hosted a gathering at the ranch. The Hartwells came, and the Reeves family and Mrs. Chen with her grown children. Even a few townspeople showed up, bringing gifts and good wishes. It was not a large party, but it was warm and genuine, full of laughter and friendship. As Meredith watched Yates playing with James, as she looked around at the friends they had made and the life they had created, she felt overwhelming gratitude. The frozen town had rejected her, tried to drive her away, but one good man had opened his door and said, "Welcome home." That single act of kindness had changed everything, had given her a chance to build something beautiful out of nothing. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just how far I have come," Meredith replied. "A little over 2 years ago I arrived here with nothing and no one. Now I have everything that matters." "You earned it," Sarah said firmly. "You could have left when they tried to drive you out. You could have let their cruelty break you. Instead, you stood your ground and built a life. That takes courage." "I had help," Meredith said, looking at Yates. "I had someone who believed in me when no one else would. And now you have a family, friends, a place in this world that no one can take from you. Hold on to that. Remember it when times get hard, because they will sometimes. But you have proven you can weather any storm." Life continued its rhythm over the following years. James grew from a baby into a bright, active toddler, full of questions and energy. Yates taught him about the ranch, letting him help with small tasks, showing him the horses and cattle with infinite patience. Meredith taught him letters and numbers, read to him every night, watched with pride as his mind developed and grew. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates's reputation for quality livestock spread, and he began selling breeding stock to other ranchers throughout Nevada and into California. The income allowed them to make improvements to the property, to save for James's future, to feel secure in a way neither of them had known before their marriage. When James was 3 years old, Meredith discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do, her mind less anxious about the process. In late autumn, she gave birth to their daughter, whom they named Clara after Yates's mother. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's storm-gray eyes, and she was as calm and peaceful as James was energetic and boisterous. Their family felt complete. 2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a marriage that had only grown stronger and deeper with time. Meredith sometimes had to stop and remind herself that this was her life, that she had not just dreamed it into being. Mrs. Whitmore finally extended an olive branch when Clara was 6 months old, inviting them to a town social event. It was not a warm invitation, but it was acknowledgement of their place in the community. Meredith and Yates discussed it and decided to attend, bringing both children and making it clear they were a family unit, solid and unshakable. The event was awkward at times, but several people made genuine efforts to be welcoming. The minister who had turned Meredith away that first day actually apologized, admitting that he had let the town's prejudices cloud his Christian duty. Mrs. Whitmore remained cool but civil, which was as much as could be expected. By the end of the evening, Meredith felt that they had turned a real corner. They might never be the town's favorite family, but they were accepted, respected even. Years passed in the way they do when life is good, each day precious, but somehow blurring together into seasons and cycles. James started school in town, riding in with Yates on supply days and staying with Sarah Hartwell until it was time to go home. He was bright and popular with the other children, untouched by the prejudices that had marked his parents' early years in Tonopah Junction. Clara grew into a sweet, thoughtful child who loved books and horses equally. Meredith watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, aware that these years of them being small and home would pass too quickly. But she savored each moment, each milestone, each ordinary day of their extraordinary life. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Yates surprised her with a new horse, a beautiful mare with gentle eyes and a smooth gait. "For all those rides you never got to take because you were too busy taking care of the rest of us," he said as he led the horse to where Meredith stood in the yard. She was speechless with delight, running her hands over the mare's neck, already imagining riding out over the hills she had called home for a decade. "She is perfect. What is her name? Whatever you want to call her, she is yours." "Hope," Meredith decided. "I will call her Hope, because that is what I found here. Hope and home and happiness." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch as they had so many times over the years, watching the stars emerge in the Nevada sky. Yates held her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. "When you showed up at my door half frozen and desperate?" "Sometimes," Meredith admitted. "It seems like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In some ways it did. We have both changed so much since then, but I still remember exactly what I thought when I saw you standing there." "What did you think?" "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." Walking all over that town asking for help, knowing they had all rejected you, and still having the courage to knock on one more door. I knew immediately that you were strong, that you were a fighter. I think I started falling in love with you right then, though I did not recognize it yet." Meredith leaned her head against his shoulder. "I thought you were my last chance. I thought if you turned me away, I would die in that storm. But you did not turn me away. You said come inside, and then you said welcome home, and my entire life changed in that moment." "Our entire lives changed," Yates corrected. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions of life but not really living it. You brought joy and purpose and love into this house. You made it a home. Everything good in my life now traces back to the day I opened that door and found you standing there." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts full. Behind them, their children slept safely in their beds. Around them, the ranch they had built together stood solid and prosperous. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky in their eternal dance. "Thank you," Meredith said softly, "for taking a chance on me, for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for giving me a home and a family and a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible." "Thank you," Yates replied, "for having the courage to knock on my door, for staying when they tried to drive you away, for loving me and building this life with me. You are my home, Meredith. You and James and Clara. As long as I have you, I have everything I will ever need." As they rose to go inside, to check on their sleeping children and retire to their own room, Meredith paused to look out over the ranch one more time. The frozen town had rejected her, tried to break her spirit and drive her away. But one cowboy had opened his door and said, "Welcome home," and that had made all the difference. She had found more than shelter in Yates Donovan. She had found partnership and love and belonging. She had found the strength to stand against injustice, the courage to build a life on her own terms, and the joy of watching that life flourish and grow. The town of Tonopah Junction, Nevada had taught her that belonging was not given but earned, that family was not just blood but choice, and that home was not a place but the people who loved you without condition. She had learned those lessons well, and she had built something beautiful from them. As she followed Yates inside and closed the door behind them, shutting out the night and sealing in the warmth of their home, Meredith felt nothing but gratitude. Her journey had been hard, marked by loss and rejection and struggle. But it had led her here to this moment, this family, this life. And she would not change a single step of the path that had brought her home. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch faced hard winters and dry summers, market fluctuations, and the occasional bout of illness among the livestock. James went through a rebellious phase in his teenage years, testing boundaries and questioning everything. Clara struggled with shyness that made school difficult at times. Yates dealt with an injury from a fall that left him limping for months. But they faced every challenge together, as a family, drawing on the strength they had built over the years. Meredith discovered that the resilience that had carried her through that first terrible day in Tonopah Junction had only grown stronger with time and practice. Nothing could break her now, because she was not alone anymore. She had Yates beside her, steady and true, and she had her children, and she had the home they had all built together. When James turned 18, he chose to attend university in California, wanting to study agriculture science so he could bring modern techniques back to improve the ranch. It was hard to let him go, but Meredith and Yates were proud of his ambition and his dedication to the family legacy. They had raised him to be independent and thoughtful, and those qualities were serving him well. Clara, at 16, had become an accomplished equestrian and was beginning to train horses alongside her father. She had his patience and her mother's gentle determination, and the horses responded beautifully to her. Watching her work, Meredith often thought about that mare Yates had given her years ago, about how Hope had become Clara's favorite horse to ride, about the continuity and tradition being built here. On a spring day when James was home from university and Clara was working with a young colt in the corral, Meredith stood with Yates watching their children, feeling the weight of time and the blessing of it. "We did well," Yates said quietly. "We did," Meredith agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Do you ever regret it, coming here, staying despite everything?" Meredith turned to look at him, at the silver threading through his dark hair now, at the lines time and weather had carved into his face, at the eyes that still looked at her with the same love and wonder they had held on their wedding day. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Every hard thing that happened brought me closer to this. Every rejection and struggle was worth it to end up here, with you, with them, with this life. I would do it all again exactly the same way if it meant arriving at this moment." He kissed her then, a kiss that held 2 decades of love and partnership and devotion. When they pulled apart, James was pretending to gag dramatically and Clara was laughing, and Meredith felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. This was home. Not the house, though she loved every log and board of it. Not the land, though it was beautiful and bountiful. Home was this, these people, these moments of connection and joy and shared life. Home was the laughter of her children, and the steadiness of her husband, and the knowledge that she belonged here, that she had earned her place through courage and perseverance and love. The frozen town had rejected her, but that rejection had led her to exactly where she needed to be. One cowboy had opened his door and said welcome home, and in doing so, he had given her everything. A life, a family, a future full of hope and possibility. And now, years later, as she stood surrounded by everything she loved most in this world, Meredith knew with absolute certainty that she was truly, finally, completely home. As the sun set over the hills of Nevada, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, the Donovan family headed inside for dinner, their voices mixing with laughter and easy conversation. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming, a beacon in the gathering darkness. Inside, the table was set and the food was ready, and they gathered together as they had thousands of times before. James told stories about university, Clara talked about her progress with the horses, Yates discussed plans for spring planting, and Meredith listened to it all with deep contentment. After dinner, as had become tradition, they spent time together in the main room. James played the guitar he had learned at school, Clara sang in a voice that was becoming quite lovely, and Yates and Meredith sat close together on the sofa they had bought to replace the original chairs years ago. When the children finally headed to bed, Meredith and Yates remained by the fire, savoring the quiet and the peace. These moments had become precious as the children grew older and more independent, time that was just for the two of them, connecting and renewing the bond that was the foundation of their family. "I love you," Yates said, as he had said thousands of times over the years. "Thank you for saying yes that day, for taking a chance on me and this life." "I love you too," Meredith replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Thank you for giving me a home." They sat together as the fire burned low, comfortable in their silence, secure in their love. Outside, the Nevada night was cold and clear, stars brilliant against the black sky. Inside, the house was warm and full of life, every corner holding memories of the years they had spent building something beautiful together. This was their legacy, Meredith thought as sleep began to claim her. Not just the ranch or the livestock or the land, but this. The home they had made, the love they had nurtured, the family they had created against all odds. They had taken rejection and hardship and turned it into something golden, something lasting. The frozen town had rejected her, but one cowboy had opened his door and said, "Welcome home." And together, they had built a life that was worth every struggle it had taken to achieve it. They had built home and family and love that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by their children and their children's children. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. And as Meredith drifted off to sleep in the home she had helped build, in the arms of the man who had given her everything, she knew that she had found exactly what she had been searching for that frozen day so many years ago. She had found home.